The fitness elite gym smelled like sweat, industrial bleach, and ambition. It was 5:47 a.m. on a Tuesday morning, that perfect window of time when only the obsessed showed up. Sunlight hadn't yet broken through the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the parking lot, so the gym existed in that gray space between night and day where anything felt possible and nothing felt real. Corinne Whitmore stood in front of the leg press machine, her trainer, Marcus, hovering nearby with a clipboard. She was 52 years old, with the kind of determined musculature that came from years of relentless discipline. Her ponytail was wrapped so tightly it pulled the skin near her temples, and her jaw was set in that familiar expression of controlled fury that had become her resting face since the divorce 3 years ago. "Come on, Corinne," Marcus said, his voice carrying that careful encouragement reserved for clients who were a single motivational speech away from either transformation or meltdown. "You've got 3 more. 3 more and you hit your personal record." Corinne's thighs burned. Her knees ached. Her back protested with each repetition, but Corinne had taught herself long ago that pain was just information, and information could be ignored if you had enough will. She'd built a life on ignoring information, the kind that came in divorce papers, school principal meetings, and tax audits. She'd learned that if you pushed hard enough, far enough, long enough, the world had no choice but to respect you. She pushed 1 rep, 2 reps, 3. When she stood up, her legs felt like water, but her face showed nothing. Marcus scribbled something on his clipboard, and Corinne caught her reflection in the mirror behind the weights. She looked strong. She looked capable. She looked like someone who could handle anything. That was the thing about the gym. In here, you got to decide who you were. "Great work today," Marcus said, checking his watch. "Same time Thursday." Corinne nodded, grabbing her towel. She wiped her face, her neck, the back of her arms. The gym was starting to fill up now. A couple of college guys had claimed the free weights section. A woman was on the treadmill, her gaze fixed forward with religious determination. The world was waking up, and Corinne needed to get back to hers. A shower, a coffee, the drive to her office where she managed accounts at Hutchinson and Associates. A job that paid well enough to fund her divorce settlement but never quite filled the void of what used to be her life. She was walking toward the locker room when she first noticed the girl. She was small, probably no more than 17, maybe even younger, with the kind of natural frame that hadn't yet been corrupted by the real world's demands. Blonde hair and a high ponytail. Fresh-faced in a way that made Corinne's chest tighten with an emotion she didn't want to examine. The girl was working the cable machine, and she was doing it wrong. Her form was sloppy, her movements unfocused. She was the kind of person who came to the gym to take selfies and pretend that showing up mattered. Corinne watched for a moment longer than was necessary. The girl had come with a friend, another blonde, just as young, just as fresh, just as unburdened by consequence. They were laughing about something, their voices carrying that infectious lightness that made the gym feel smaller and more suffocating. The friend held up her phone, and the girl smiled, really smiled, the kind of genuine smile that Corinne couldn't remember making anymore. Something in Corinne's chest twisted. She turned away and continued toward the locker room. It was none of her business. The girl's form, the girl's dedication, the girl's youth and beauty and ease with the world. None of it was Corinne's concern. But she found her mind looping back to the girl even as she showered. Even as the hot water ran over her shoulders and her muscles slowly released their tension. Even as she dressed and blow-dried her hair with practiced efficiency. She'd always been this way, hyper-aware of everything around her, analyzing, judging, assigning value. It was a skill that had served her well in finance, in her marriage before it curdled in the careful reconstruction of her identity after her husband, Richard, had left her for his dental hygienist. But lately, that hyper-awareness felt less like an asset and more like a curse. Everything offended her now. Everything felt like a slight, a mockery, a reminder that the world didn't care about her anymore. Corinne was walking out of the locker room when she saw the girl again. She was standing in front of the mirror in the hallway, taking pictures of herself, her phone held up at that perfect angle. Her friend was beside her, coaching her through poses. "That's the one," the friend said. "You look so hot." Corinne felt her jaw tighten. Hot, as if that was an accomplishment. As if that was anything that mattered in a real world, a serious world, a world that demanded something more than genetics and youth. She told herself to keep walking. She told herself none of this was her problem. But as she walked past them, the girl's friend bumped into her, A small collision, barely noticeable, an accident of proximity in a crowded hallway. The friend didn't even look up from her phone, didn't apologize, didn't acknowledge that Karen existed. Karen's hands clenched into fists. "Excuse me," she said. It came out sharper than she intended. The friend finally looked up, that same casual brightness in her eyes. "Oh, hey, sorry, didn't see you there." "Obviously," Karen said. The two girls exchanged a glance, some silent communication that passed between them. Karen recognized it immediately. It was pity. It was that particular form of pity that young people reserved for the old, that fleeting moment of sympathy before they returned their attention to their own lives, their own importance, their own glowing futures. Karen kept walking. She didn't look back, she didn't need to. But she found herself returning to the gym on Thursday, and on Saturday, and on Monday. And she found herself always at the same time, that magical window before dawn when the world was mostly empty. And the girl was always there. Her name was Madison. Karen learned this from the friend who called out, "Hey, Maddie," whenever they arrived together. Madison, of course. A name that sounded like a brand, like something manufactured in a lab designed to appeal to exactly no one with actual substance. Madison came 3 times a week. She never improved her form. She never pushed herself harder. She just came, took her pictures, left. She was a ghost haunting the gym, present in body but absent in any way that mattered. Karen told herself she didn't care. She told herself this was just the rhythm of the gym, just the landscape of her early mornings, just background noise. But something was building in her, some pressure that had been accumulating over years, over the slow erosion of her relevance, over the way the world had decided she was no longer worth watching. She'd spent her entire adult life being competent, being strong, being someone who mattered. And now she was invisible. The girls looked through her. The younger women at the gym didn't brace themselves when they saw her coming. She was just something to move around, like a wall or a shadow. Madison represented everything that had displaced her. Effortless youth, untested potential. The world's automatic assumption that your future would be full and bright and consequential. The morning it happened was a Wednesday. Karen had finished her workout and was heading to the locker room when she saw Madison standing in front of the cable machine that Karen usually reserved for her cooldown. Madison was on her phone, not working out at all, just standing there, blocking the equipment, taking another picture of herself. Karen stood for a moment waiting. It was a test of sorts, a moment to see if Madison would notice her, if Madison would move. If Madison would acknowledge that other people existed in the world, people with plans and time constraints and actual reasons to be there. Madison didn't move. Karen waited another minute, 2 minutes. Madison was completely absorbed in her phone, in the image of herself, in the closed loop of her own existence. Karen approached her. Her voice was polite, even reasonable. "Excuse me, I need to use that machine." Madison looked up, startled. "Oh, I'm kind of using it." "You're on your phone," Karen said. "Yeah, but I'm still working out." The lie was so casual, so confident, that it took Karen's breath away. This girl, this child, had the audacity to stand there and pretend, to claim something she wasn't doing, to exist in her own reality where the rules that applied to everyone else simply didn't apply to her. "No, you're not," Karen said. "You're taking pictures, you're in the way, you need to move." Madison's face shifted. She was unused to being contradicted, unused to someone refusing to accept her version of events. "I'm just going to be 1 more minute." "I said you need to move." The volume of Karen's voice had risen. A few people glanced over. Karen didn't care. She was done. She was done with invisibility. She was done with being treated like nothing by people who had no idea how little they'd have without the world's automatic generosity toward their age and their appearance. Madison's friend, the one who'd bumped into Karen weeks before, suddenly appeared. "What's going on?" "This lady is being super rude," Madison said. "Because you're in the way," Karen said. "This is a gym, not a photo studio." "There are like 5 other machines," the friend said. "Why does it have to be this one?" "Because I said so." The words came out of Karen's mouth, and she watched them land. She watched Madison's face, this girl who had never been told no, who had never been refused, who existed in a world where her comfort and convenience were everyone else's priority. The girl's eyes widened slightly. Her friend put a protective hand on her arm. "We're going to use it," the friend said firmly. You can wait or use something else. Corinne felt something break open inside her chest. Something she'd been holding together with willpower and Pilates and the careful construction of a life that required no one to care about her, because she had stopped caring about anything except being strong enough to not need anyone else. She reached out and shoved Madison, not hard enough to hurt, not hard enough to be anything more than a forceful gesture of frustration, but hard enough that the girl staggered back, surprise blooming across her face. "Don't ever be rude to your elders," Corinne said. The words sounded ridiculous even as she said them, which somehow made it worse. "You need to learn some respect." For a moment no one moved. Madison's friend looked like she was about to cry. Madison looked shocked. A few people had stopped what they were doing and were staring at them. Corinne felt her face heat. She realized what she'd done. She realized how it must have looked, a middle-aged woman shaking with rage, confronting a teenager, an adult bullying a child. "I'm leaving," Corinne said, and she did. She grabbed her towel and her bag and walked out of the gym into the bright morning light. She told herself it was fine. It was nothing. Just a moment of frustration that she'd regret later, but only briefly, only in that way that acknowledging a mistake meant you didn't have to change anything about yourself. She told herself no one would care. She told herself the cameras probably didn't even capture it. She told herself she'd never see Madison again. She told herself a lot of things as she sat in her car in the parking lot, her hands shaking on the steering wheel, feeling the first tendrils of dread curling through her chest. Not the moral dread of having hurt someone, but the practical dread of having been stupid, of having left evidence, of having stepped outside the carefully controlled world she'd built and into the chaos where actions had consequences. She was still sitting there when Madison and her friend came out of the gym, Madison's phone already in her hand, already calling someone. Corinne pulled out of the parking lot and drove toward her office. The morning light caught the edges of the buildings as she passed them, and everything looked sharp and dangerous, like a world composed entirely of sharp edges and traps waiting to spring. She told herself it didn't matter. She told herself she was already invisible. Madison's mother, Christine Patterson, was a partner at Thornton and Wells law firm. She was the kind of woman who went to yoga at 6 in the morning, who color-coded her calendar, who had already mentally calculated the exact amount of damage this incident would cause before her daughter had finished describing it. She sat in the manager's office at Fitness Elite Gym, her posture perfect, her expression serene, while the gym manager, a nervous man named Derek with a name tag that looked like it had been slapped on 30 seconds before she walked in, fumbled with his computer to pull up the security footage. "Ms. Patterson, I want to say right away that I've been in contact with our corporate office about this," Derek said. "We take every incident very seriously." "The incident," Christine interrupted, "is that a member of your facility physically assaulted my daughter. Let's not dress it up as something else." Madison sat beside her mother, looking smaller than she normally did, her face blotchy from crying. She'd told the story 3 times now, the first time to her friend, the second time to their parents, the third time over the phone to her mother, who'd been in a meeting and had to excuse herself with the kind of imperious authority that people granted without question. Derek's fingers clicked nervously across the keyboard. "Here," he said, and the computer screen showed the gym floor. 4 camera angles displayed simultaneously in different quadrants. One showed the cable machine area, one showed the free weights, one showed the entrance, one showed the hallway. Derek clicked on a timestamp, and the footage began to play. Christine leaned forward. She watched her daughter move through the space, phone in hand, wearing workout clothes that barely looked worn. She watched the older woman, the one Madison had pointed out, finish her machine work and stand up. She watched the interaction unfold in silent footage, but the body language was unmistakable. Confrontation, escalation, the older woman pointing, Madison shaking her head, the friend arriving. And then the shove. It happened so fast that Christine almost missed it, but the footage was clear. The older woman's hand on Madison's shoulder, a push backward, Madison stumbling. The moment lasted less than 2 seconds, but it was undeniable. It was assault. Christine felt something crystallize inside her, not anger exactly, but something more useful than anger. Purpose. Clarity. The specific determination of someone with resources and knowledge entering a situation where the power dynamics had just shifted dramatically in her favor. "I need the full footage from today," Christine said. "All of it. Every angle from the moment this woman arrived until the moment she left, and I need the system to save everything. I'll be contacting my attorney and will likely be contacting the police as well." Derek's face went pale. Yes, of course. I'll have that for you immediately. Ms. Patterson, I want to say that we have zero tolerance for—" "You have liability," Christine corrected. "You have footage of assault occurring in your facility. You have failed to maintain a safe environment for your members, particularly minors. You don't get to have tolerance right now. You get to cooperate." She turned to Madison. "Are you hurt?" Madison shook her head, though her eyes were still wet. "Did she touch you anywhere else? Did she speak to you in any way that made you uncomfortable beyond the physical contact?" "She said I needed to learn respect," Madison said. "She was really angry, like scary angry, and everyone was watching." Christine nodded. That was good. Embarrassment, humiliation, emotional distress. All of it added layers to the case. She stood up. "Email me everything. The footage, the incident report, the membership information for this woman. Everything. You have 2 hours." She took Madison's hand and led her out of the gym, her mind already moving through the calculus of the next steps. Police report. Hospital visit. Even if Madison wasn't injured, documentation mattered. Attorney consultation, though she could handle the initial legal strategy herself. Social media would be involved. Christine was smart enough to know that this kind of story traveled faster than her lawyers could, and she could use that momentum. But first, she needed to know who this woman was. Derek sent everything by email within 90 minutes. Christine opened it at her office, Madison sitting at her conference table doing homework, looking small against the enormous leather chair. The woman's name was Corinne Whitmore, age 52, membership active for 2 years, address in the Riverside neighborhood, employment listed as account manager at Hutchinson and Associates. Christine did a quick search. Corinne Whitmore's LinkedIn popped up immediately. The photo was professional, corporate, taken maybe 5 years ago. Corinne looked competent, impressive even, the kind of woman who'd built a careful life, a visible life with achievements and titles and professional credentials. The kind of woman who had everything to lose. Christine smiled, not a pleasant expression, something sharper, more satisfied. She'd spent her career dismantling people like this. Women who thought their competence and their carefully constructed lives made them invincible. Women who operated under the assumption that if they just worked hard enough, followed the rules, never gave anyone reason to doubt them, they'd be safe. Corinne Whitmore had just discovered what Christine already knew. No one was ever safe. The police report was filed that evening. Detective Lisa Morrison took the statement from Madison, viewing the footage on her phone while Christine stood beside her daughter, recording everything on her own phone. The detective's expression didn't change much, but Christine could see the calculation happening behind her eyes. "It's a clear case of assault," Christine said. "Unprovoked, multiple witnesses, documented on security footage. I want to know what the next steps are." Detective Morrison looked up from her phone. She was in her 50s, maybe early 60s, with the weathered look of someone who'd spent a long time seeing the worst in people and had made peace with it. "Ms. Patterson, I'm going to be honest with you. This is technically assault, yes, but given that there was no significant injury—" "Assault doesn't require injury," Christine interrupted. "Assault is the threat or act of causing physical harm. Intent matters. This woman clearly intended." "I understand the law," Detective Morrison said, with that particular tone of people who have had their expertise questioned one too many times. "What I'm saying is that cases like this often end up being handled through civil channels rather than criminal prosecution. It's unlikely to go to trial unless—" "Unless you do your job," Christine said. "This was an adult assaulting a minor, in public, on camera. Unless you're suggesting that the law applies differently to women of a certain age, I think we have a clear case for criminal charges." The detective closed her notebook. "I'll investigate, I'll interview the woman, but I can't promise anything. Cases like this." "Like what?" Christine asked. "Cases where there's clear documentation, or cases where the victim is young and pretty and sympathetic?" "Cases where the damage is minimal and the context doesn't suggest ongoing danger," Detective Morrison said. And there was something in her tone that made Christine understand that she'd just made an enemy of someone with actual authority in the situation. But that was fine. Christine had made enemies before. She was very good at winning. Corinne learned about the police report the next morning. when Detective Morrison showed up at Hutchinson and Associates. She was in a meeting with 2 clients when the receptionist called her. Corinne excused herself, her stomach already in knots at the interruption. Disruptions meant problems. Problems meant consequences. Detective Morrison was standing in the hallway, badge visible, carrying a notebook. "Ms. Whitmore, I'm Detective Lisa Morrison. I need to ask you some questions about an incident at Fitness Elite Gym yesterday morning." Corinne felt the world slow down. She'd spent the entire night telling herself it was fine, that no one had really seen, that Madison probably wouldn't report it, that these things, once they passed, were handled in that unspoken way where people understood that teenagers were sometimes annoying and adults sometimes lost their patience, and it all just resolved itself without official channels. She'd been naive. "Of course," Corinne heard herself say. "Would you like to go to my office?" Detective Morrison followed her, and the entire floor seemed to hold its breath. Corinne could feel the stares, the whispers that would ripple through the office the moment they closed the door. She'd built her reputation here carefully, competent, reliable, no drama. And now there was drama, the kind that arrived with a police badge. She told the detective what had happened, but she reframed it. The girl had been disrespectful. She'd been blocking the equipment. There had been a miscommunication. It was a shove, yes, but not the kind of thing that required police involvement. There was no injury. There was no real harm. Just a moment of frustration from both sides, the kind of thing that happened in gyms all the time. "The girl's mother doesn't see it that way," Detective Morrison said. Corinne's heart sank. A lawyer mother, of course. The universe had a sense of humor, one that was consistently hostile to people like Corinne. "This wasn't malicious," Corinne said. "I made a mistake in the heat of the moment. I'm willing to apologize. I could offer some kind of settlement if they want." "I can't advise you on that," Detective Morrison said. "But I would suggest consulting with a lawyer. For now, I'm going to advise against any direct contact with the victim or her family. We'll determine whether charges are warranted." After Detective Morrison left, Corinne sat in her office with the door closed and listened to her career end. It was the strangest thing. She could hear it happening, like a sound so distant it almost wasn't there, but unmistakable once you recognized it. The whispers were already starting outside her door. By the end of the day, everyone would know. By tomorrow, the story would have grown and shifted. By next week, she'd be the type of person who assaulted teenagers in gyms. The type of person you talked about with disgust. The type of person who deserved what came next. Corinne looked up the law firm's website. Patterson and Associates. Of course, Christine Patterson was listed as a partner. Of course, she had a picture on the website looking powerful and successful and absolutely convinced of her own righteousness. Corinne clicked on her LinkedIn. Christine Patterson's photo, her credentials, her recommendations from various impressive people. Everything about her suggested that she was exactly the kind of person who could destroy another person and never lose a moment of sleep over it. Corinne's hands were shaking when she called her own lawyer. A recommendation from her father, someone named Martin Reeves, who handled corporate law and divorce settlements, but who had criminal attorneys on retainer. "It's serious," Martin said after she'd explained everything. "Not catastrophically serious. This is technically assault, but it's a first-time incident with minimal injury. That said, the victim's mother being a lawyer complicates things. They'll know how to maximize the damage of this." "What do I do?" "You don't contact them. You don't make any statements without me present. You apologize to your employer privately and you prepare yourself for the possibility of termination. We'll see what the detective finds, what charges might be brought. If it goes to trial, we fight it. If they offer a settlement, we negotiate hard. But your immediate goal is limiting the damage to your life. Everything beyond that is secondary." Corinne felt something essential drain out of her. Limiting the damage, as if her life wasn't already destroyed, as if there was anything left to limit. She spent that night at home, drinking wine and reading news articles on her laptop about other women who'd been charged with assault. None of them looked like criminals. They all looked like regular people who'd made one mistake, one wrong choice, and watched it metastasize into something that consumed everything. By the next morning, there were 2 local news stations calling the gym, asking about the incident. By the afternoon, a reporter had tracked down Corinne's home address and was calling her phone. She didn't answer. Instead, she sat in her living room and watched her world contract in real time. Her boss called, official leave of absence, pending the outcome of the investigation. The gym emailed, membership revoked, her equipment removed from her locker. A few friends called with careful voices and careful words that meant they'd heard something and were deciding whether to stay or run. Most of them ran. By Friday, a video had appeared on Instagram, shaky footage from someone's phone showing the moment Karen shoved Madison. It wasn't the security footage, but it was clear enough. Madison looked shocked and frightened. Karen looked like someone who'd lost control. The caption read, "This woman assaulted me at the gym for taking pictures. Please help me hold her accountable." It had 10,000 views by the time Karen saw it, 50,000 by Saturday morning. By Sunday, it had gone viral in the local community Facebook groups. By Monday, the news had picked it up properly. "Local woman charged with assault following gym incident," read the headline. Not charged. Being charged required an actual charge. But Karen had been informed by Martin that, yes, the police were moving forward with an official report that would be submitted to the district attorney. Actual charges would follow soon. Karen called in sick to work, a formality, really, since everyone already knew she wasn't coming back. She told her father what had happened, and he reacted with the kind of profound disappointment that was somehow worse than anger. She avoided her friends. She let her gym membership lapse. She ordered groceries online and didn't leave the house. She was afraid. Not of prison, Martin assured her that was unlikely, but of the systematic dismantling of her existence that was already underway. The news articles with her photo. The comment sections full of people calling her a monster. The way that everything she'd built, the competence, the strength, the careful life, was being reframed as something sinister. A woman afraid. A woman jealous of youth. A woman so desperate to feel powerful that she'd hurt a teenager who'd done nothing wrong except exist in her presence. The narrative had already written itself. And Karen understood, sitting in her living room on a Tuesday evening, watching her phone ping with notifications about herself that she was afraid to open, that she'd become the kind of person the world wanted to destroy. Not because she was actually dangerous, but because she was convenient. Because she'd made the mistake of being visible in her rage. The district attorney's office moved faster than Karen expected. 3 weeks after the incident, Martin called with the official news. Assault charges would be filed. Nothing felony level, technically a misdemeanor, the kind of charge that normally resulted in fines, probation, and anger management classes. But it was still a criminal charge. It would still be on her record. It would still mark her as the kind of person who'd hurt a teenager at a gym. The court date was set for 6 weeks out, enough time for Karen's entire life to collapse in incremental stages. She lost her job on a Tuesday afternoon. Her boss, David Chen, called her into the office and informed her that Hutchinson and Associates had decided to move in a different direction with her position. The language was corporate, gentle, but the message was absolute. She was a liability. She was toxic. They couldn't have her representing the firm in the current climate. "I understand," Karen said, because what else was there to say? "Your severance package is substantial," David said, and he looked uncomfortable. "We've covered 6 months of benefits. We're hoping that will provide time for you to address the current situation." Address the situation, as if she could solve assault charges through positive thinking or a vacation. She didn't cry until she was in her car. Not from the loss of the job, she'd known that was coming, but from the numbness of it all. The systematic removal of the things that made her feel like a person who mattered. Without work, without the gym, without the structure that had held her identity together, she had nothing. She had a house in Riverside. She had a 401k. She had her father who'd stopped calling after the initial conversation because he didn't know what to say. She had Martin, who was very competent and very expensive. She had no friends, or rather, she had friends the way that people had exes. There was a relationship in the past tense, and everyone was too uncomfortable with how things had ended to attempt anything in the present. She had herself, and she was discovering that herself was not actually that interesting when stripped of professional accomplishment and early morning rituals. The media storm had calmed to a simmer by this point, but it never quite died. Every few days, someone would post about her on social media, usually tying the story to some larger narrative about women and violence or age and insecurity. Karen became a symbol of something to someone. She wasn't sure exactly what, but she was certain it reflected nothing about who she actually was. Christine Patterson did an interview with a local news station. Karen watched it on YouTube, sitting alone in her living room, unable to look away. "My daughter is a good kid," Christine said, and she looked sincere in a way that made Karen understand she believed every word. She goes to the gym to work out, like a lot of teenagers her age. She doesn't deserve to be assaulted by an adult because that adult is having a bad day. The interviewer nodded sympathetically. The security footage clearly shows what happened, Christine continued. My daughter didn't do anything to provoke this. She didn't touch Ms. Whitmore. She didn't even speak to her in an inappropriate way. But that woman decided that a teenager taking pictures was somehow worthy of violence. That's not okay. That's never okay. Karen pressed pause. She stared at Christine Patterson's face, the certainty in her expression, the righteous anger, the complete and utter conviction that she was on the correct side of this story. And the worst part was that she probably was. Karen had assaulted a teenager. There was no way around that fact. The cameras had seen it. The law saw it. The entire world saw it. What Karen had done was objectively wrong, and no amount of context or reasoning or internal justification would change that. But the violence in Christine Patterson's satisfaction was also something Karen could see clearly now. The way that being right was not the same as being good. The way that justice and vengeance looked almost identical when you were the one deciding what they meant. Karen's phone rang. Martin. We need to talk about a plea deal, he said. The DA's office is offering something reasonable. Guilty plea to simple assault, minimal fine, anger management classes, 6 months probation. You'd avoid a trial, avoid the media circus of that, and you'd have a clear end date to this. What does guilty mean? Karen asked. It means you admit to the assault. I did assault her. Yes, but there are degrees, there's context, there's no context, Karen said. I pushed her. I wanted to hurt her feelings even if I didn't want to hurt her body. I wanted her to feel small the way I felt small. That's assault. Martin was quiet for a moment. Karen, you need to think about your future. A plea means criminal record, yes, but it's resolved. You move on, you move forward. I don't think I get to move forward, Karen said. I think I'm the kind of person now who hurt teenagers. That's what I am. That's all I'm ever going to be to anyone who knows about this. She hung up before Martin could respond. The plea deal made sense in the rational world where consequences could be calculated and concluded. Karen accepted it on the advice of her lawyer, stood in front of a judge who looked deeply tired and said the words, guilty. It took less than 5 minutes. The judge issued the sentence, a fine of $2,000, 6 months of probation during which she had to take a court-ordered anger management class and stay out of trouble, and a 10-day community service requirement. Compared to what it could have been, it was merciful. It was also, Karen understood as she left the courtroom, the official ending to her life as she'd known it. She couldn't find a job. Her background check showed the conviction. Every company that interviewed her went through the motions and then ghosted. She tried freelance accounting work, but clients read about her case and found different accountants. She tried Uber driving and made it 3 weeks before the company deactivated her account after someone recognized her and left a 1-star review with screenshots of news articles. The anger management classes were exactly as humiliating as they sounded. A room full of people, mostly men, who'd gotten into bar fights or domestic disputes or who'd hit someone in a parking lot. And Karen, the woman who'd pushed a teenager at a gym and somehow managed to turn it into a media narrative about age and insecurity and violence against youth. The counselor was a woman named Dr. Patricia Wung, who had that particular skill of taking everyone's worst moments and treating them with absolute seriousness. I want to talk today about anger as a response to powerlessness, Dr. Wung said in their group session. Many of us here have experienced a profound loss of control in our lives, and anger is how we try to reassert that control. But what we're learning is that violence, even symbolic violence, even a small act of aggression, is never actually a response to powerlessness. It's a way of deepening it. Karen listened to a guy named Robert talk about how he'd hit his boss, and another guy named Miguel talk about pushing his girlfriend. She listened to them describe the moment, over and over, the same moment where they'd felt something inside them snap. The familiar moment. The moment Karen had been living for years before it finally expressed itself as a shove in a gym. When it was Karen's time to share, she told the truth. She told them about the divorce, about the aging, about the feeling that the world had decided she was no longer worth seeing. She told them about Madison, about the girl's casual disregard for her existence, about how that small moment of invisibility had broken something. I understand, Robert said afterward. That feeling, man, like the whole world is just moving past you. But you can't push people, Karen said. That's the thing I'm learning. You can't push people because you're angry about being invisible. You just end up more visible, but in the worst way possible. She did her 10 days of community service picking up trash along the highway, wearing a neon vest, visible to every car that passed. It was exactly as designed to be, a moment of enforced humility, a public acknowledgement of her status as someone who'd violated the social contract. By the time her probation ended, 6 months later, Karen had become someone different, not in a transformed by therapy way, not in a way that would make a good movie, but in the quiet way that people changed when everything they'd used to define themselves was stripped away. She'd moved into a smaller apartment. She'd found work at a tax preparation place where they didn't really check backgrounds. They just needed seasonal workers, and Karen was willing. She went to the gym, but a different gym at different times, and she kept her eyes on her own work. She'd made exactly one friend during this period. Her name was Susan, and she worked at the tax place, and she'd made the mistake of asking Karen one day about the minor celebrity status of her case. Karen had been honest, and somehow honesty had created a space where friendship could exist. You shoved her, Susan said, when Karen had finished explaining. I did. And she was being kind of annoying. She was being 17. Susan had laughed then, a real laugh. I got charged with assault when I was 22, beat up my ex-boyfriend's new girlfriend at a bar. I'm not proud of it, but I'm also not going to pretend I regret it. I regret it, Karen said. Yeah, but you also still think she was annoying, don't you? Karen smiled. It was the first genuine smile she'd made in months. Yeah, I still think that. She was working on accepting that about herself, that she could regret her actions and still be angry about the context, that she could understand the harm she'd caused and still believe that Madison had been disrespectful. That two things could be true at the same time, and the world didn't have room for nuance anymore. The world wanted you to be either fully wrong or fully right, and Karen was trying to find a way to live in the space where you were both. It happened quietly at first. A police report filed, questions asked. Madison had been arrested for a DUI at midnight on a Friday, swerving across 2 lanes, nearly hitting another car. She was 17, which was the legal drinking age nowhere, and she was driving, which was the dangerous combination that had always been predictable if you'd been watching the patterns. Christine Patterson called her lawyer before she called anyone else, and she handled it with the kind of brutal efficiency that made Karen understand how this woman had built her career. Bail was posted immediately. A lawyer was provided. The case was handled. But the arrest report became public record, and public records in the age of the internet meant that information traveled. Madison's mugshot appeared on social media within hours. The girl who'd been assaulted at the gym was now the girl who'd been arrested for drunk driving. The narrative shifted. Not entirely. Christine's lawyers moved to have her daughter's information sealed, but enough. Enough that people started commenting that maybe there was more to the story. Maybe assault wasn't the best lens through which to view everything. Karen learned about it from Susan, who showed her the Facebook post. Your girl got busted, Susan said. I mean not your girl, but the girl from the thing. Karen read the post, looked at Madison's mugshot, her face somehow younger and older at the same time, smeared with the particular shame of being publicly available. And she felt, what? Vindication? Relief? The small satisfaction of knowing that the person she'd hurt had turned out to be not entirely innocent. No, that wasn't it. What she felt was sadness, because she understood the pattern. Understood that Madison had probably been drinking since shortly after the assault, probably to deal with the attention and the media and the way that her life had become a story about assault. And that Karen's violence had launched a chain of consequences that had nothing to do with Karen anymore, but everything to do with the fact that everyone had been looking in the wrong directions. The arrest wasn't the big story, though. The big story came 2 weeks later when a TikTok account run by someone named Ethan Chavez posted a video with the title, The Full Story About Karen Whitmore. Ethan was a high school kid. He'd been at the gym when the incident happened, had watched it unfold, and had apparently been sitting on video footage for 8 months waiting for the right moment to release it. The footage wasn't the security camera footage. The footage was from Ethan's phone, and it showed the full context of the incident. It showed Madison deliberately walking in front of Karen while Karen was using the leg press, the two of them having words, Madison's friend laughing about Karen's workout routine. It showed Karen asking them to move, asking politely multiple times, and the girls refusing, mocking her, making jokes about her age. It showed Madison deliberately moving in front of the cable machine and refusing to move when Karen asked. And then, and only then, it showed Karen shove her. The caption on the video read, "Everyone's been talking about the assault at the gym, but no one's asking why it happened. Madison Patterson got caught being a bully and then played victim when it backfired. The security cameras supposedly show everything, but they don't show the hours of disrespect before this. Missing context, media lies." It got 3 million views in the first week. Not all of them kind to Karen. Some commenters still thought the shove was inexcusable, context or not. But a significant percentage began to reframe the narrative. Karen wasn't a monster. She was a woman who'd been disrespected, who'd lost her temper, who'd made a mistake. Madison wasn't purely a victim. She was a teenager who'd been tested an older woman and had escalated the situation. The truth, as it turned out, was much messier than any of the narratives that had been built around it. Christine Patterson's response was immediate and legal. She filed suit against Ethan Chavez for defamation, demanding the video be taken down. Ethan's parents panicked and made him take it down. But by then, it had been shared thousands of times, copied, uploaded, preserved in the way that the internet preserved things, forever in all their contradictory forms. The media picked it up. New footage raises questions about viral gym assault case. Suddenly, journalists who'd accepted the original narrative at face value were doing actual reporting. They interviewed people who'd been at the gym. They pulled the full security footage, all of it, not just the moment of the shove, but the hours before and after. What emerged was a picture of a complicated situation made simple by perspective. Karen hadn't assaulted a random teenager for no reason. She'd responded to sustained disrespect, escalating tension, and what appeared to be deliberate provocation. Madison hadn't been an innocent victim. She'd been a teenager pushing an adult's buttons for sport, the way teenagers did, not realizing that adults were just people with years of accumulated anger, and sometimes that anger had to go somewhere. None of it changed the fact that Karen had pushed her. None of it made that choice correct. But it changed the narrative, and narratives mattered more than facts sometimes. Karen didn't follow any of it closely. She told herself she didn't care. She was in a different space now, a place where the world's story about her mattered less than her own understanding of what had happened. But she was lying. Of course she was following it. Of course she cared. She was at the tax place when Susan rushed over with her phone. "Your girl," Susan said. "Actually, your girl's mom, she's giving a statement." The video was from a local news station. Christine Patterson stood in front of her law office, her attorney beside her, looking fundamentally different from the confident woman Karen had seen in interviews months before. She looked angry. She looked betrayed. "My daughter was assaulted," Christine said, and her voice carried the particular venom of someone who'd been proven wrong in public. "That fact doesn't change based on what happened before or after. What changes is that we've been subjected to a coordinated effort to reframe violence as context, and to blame a teenage victim for being harassed by an adult." She paused, and Karen could see her calculating, could see her legal mind working through the angles. "Ms. Whitmore assaulted my daughter," Christine continued. "My daughter then made a series of poor choices I believe she made because of the trauma of that assault. And now we're being asked to believe that because my daughter struggled after being assaulted, somehow the assault itself was justified. That's not justice. That's not accountability. That's just blaming the victim." The statement was brilliant, actually. It reframed the context as irrelevant. It shifted focus from what Madison had done to what Karen had done, and what Madison's response to that trauma had been. It made sympathy for Madison's DUI arrest seem like an attack on assault victims everywhere. Karen understood then what she was watching. She was watching two competent women, two women who understood how to use narrative and leverage and public opinion, battle for control of a story that wasn't actually about either of them anymore. It was about something larger, something that had its own momentum. And Karen was just a character in it, the antagonist, the cautionary tale about what happened to women who let their rage show. She called Martin that night. "Can I talk to the news? Can I give my own statement?" "Absolutely not," Martin said. "Every word you say is going to be used against you. Let this die. It will eventually. You're already out of the media cycle. Don't jump back in. But she did anyway. Not in a public statement, but in a letter. She wrote it carefully, reading it through multiple times, trying to strip away defensiveness and just present the truth as she saw it. My name is Corinne Whitmore, the letter began. I assaulted Madison Patterson at a gym on date. I was convicted of this crime and I served my sentence. I'm not writing this to ask for forgiveness or to suggest that my crime was justified. I'm writing this to try to tell the truth about what happened, which is both more complicated and more simple than either of the narratives that have been built around it. Madison Patterson did not deserve to be pushed. There is no circumstances under which an adult gets to use violence against a teenager, regardless of the teenager's behavior. I made a choice, and I committed a crime, and I am responsible for that choice and that crime. However, the version of events that has been presented, that I assaulted an innocent girl for no reason, is not accurate. Madison and her friend deliberately disrespected me, deliberately provoked me, and deliberately refused to acknowledge my requests. That does not justify violence, but it is the truth. Madison is a teenager, which means she made teenager choices. She is not responsible for my decision to respond to those choices with violence. That responsibility is entirely mine. But she also is not a victim of an unprovoked assault. She is a teenager who learned in a difficult way that there are consequences to how she treats other people. I have spent the last months understanding that I was someone worth seeing to myself, but apparently not to the world. That my anger about that invisibility is valid, but that expressing it through violence is not. I don't expect forgiveness. I'm writing this only to suggest that the world is more complicated than the stories we tell about it, and that in trying to simplify justice, we often just create new injustices. I'm sorry to Madison Patterson. I'm sorry to everyone I hurt through my actions. And I'm sorry that we live in a world where nuance and understanding seem impossible anymore. She sent it to several news outlets. Only one of them published it, a think piece in the local alternative paper, alongside an actual journalist's exploration of how social media had shaped the narrative of the case. The piece was sympathetic but critical. It noted that Corinne's letter was an attempt at nuance that didn't quite succeed, because there was something self-serving about a perpetrator asking for understanding. But it was published, it was seen, and for a moment there was something that looked like actual conversation about what had happened, rather than just competing narratives. Christine Patterson released her own statement calling Corinne's letter yet another attempt to minimize the victim's experience, and that was that. The news cycle moved on. New stories demanded attention. Madison's arrest was no longer newsworthy. Corinne's assault was old news. It happened in the cereal aisle, which felt like the kind of setting that was too mundane for any kind of real consequence. Corinne was reaching for oatmeal when she saw the girl out of the corner of her eye. Madison was in the same aisle, with a woman who was probably her mother, looking very much like a teenager who was just trying to do grocery shopping without incident. Madison saw her at almost the same moment Corinne saw her. Their eyes met for a fraction of a second, long enough for recognition, long enough for a flicker of something that might have been fear or anger or just shock at proximity. Corinne set down the oatmeal and stepped back. She walked away from the cereal aisle down toward the produce section, not looking back. She was good at making herself invisible now. It was a skill she'd cultivated. But she'd seen enough to understand that Madison had changed. She looked tired. There were lines around her eyes that teenagers shouldn't have. She looked like someone who'd lived through something and was still carrying the weight of it. Christine Patterson would claim that Corinne had caused that. Corinne would know in a fair accounting that the truth was more complicated. Madison's trauma came from assault, yes, but it also came from the media attention, from becoming a symbol, from having her worst moments become public property. She'd come from assault and landed in infamy, and Corinne couldn't take sole responsibility for that. But Corinne also couldn't escape it. The incident had changed Madison Patterson forever. The girl would always be known as the assault victim. Every college application would have someone researching her, finding the video, finding the context, making their own determinations about who she was. Every relationship she entered would eventually involve someone Googling her name and finding the news articles. The shove had erased whatever Madison was before and replaced her with a role in a story that belonged to the internet. Corinne knew this because she'd watched it happen to herself. She'd become a symbol too, the middle-aged woman who couldn't handle aging, who couldn't handle not being important, who lashed out at youth. The narrative had its hooks in her, and no amount of context or nuance could pull them free. She was dating someone now. Susan's friend, a man named David who worked in data analysis and who'd made the mistake of understanding Corinne's past and choosing not to care about it in an overdetermined way. He didn't treat her like she was a victim or a villain. He treated her like she was a person who'd done something bad and had to live with it. "You ran into her?" David asked when she told him about the grocery store. "Not really, we just saw each other." "And how did that feel?" "Complicated," Corinne said. "I wanted to say something, I wanted to explain, but what was there to explain? The damage was done, the narrative was set." "You still think about it a lot," David said. It wasn't a question. "I think about what I took from her," Corinne said. "Not her innocence, she wasn't innocent, and pretending she was is its own kind of dishonesty. But I took her anonymity. I made her into a character in a story that's going to follow her forever. That's what I actually did." "You pushed her," David said. "You didn't write the story about pushing her. You didn't decide to make it a public spectacle. But if I hadn't pushed her, the story wouldn't exist." This was the loop Corinne found herself in constantly. The recognition that she was responsible for her action, but not for how the world had chosen to respond to that action. The understanding that violence and its consequences were not proportional, that a moment of rage could metastasize into something that consumed entire lives. She'd started volunteering, working at a nonprofit that helped women in crisis. She wasn't a therapist or a counselor. She just answered phones and listened to people describe situations that seemed impossible. Women leaving abusive relationships, women trying to get custody of their kids, women navigating systems that seemed designed to punish them for existing. One of them was a girl named Alexis who'd been assaulted at a party and was struggling with the fact that everyone who'd been at the party treated her differently now. "I'm not the party girl anymore," Alexis said. "I'm the assault victim, that's all I am to anyone there." "That's how they're processing it," Corinne said. "It doesn't make it true about you." "How do I change what they think?" "You don't," Corinne said. "You can only change what you think about yourself, and you have to do that every day because the world will always try to make you into what happened to you. You have to actively choose not to believe that." "Did someone assault you?" Alexis asked. "No," Corinne said. "I assaulted someone. I hurt a teenager and it became public, and now that's how the world sees me. So I know what it's like to be trapped in a narrative you didn't write." Alexis had looked at her with this expression of recognition. Not sympathy, not exactly. Just the understanding that trauma came in different forms, and it didn't matter if you were the victim or the perpetrator. It marked you either way. "Did it get better?" Alexis asked. "It got different," Corinne said. "The intensity reduced, the frequency of painful moments decreased, but I don't think the mark ever fully disappears, you just learn to carry it." She wasn't sure if that was true, or if she was just telling Alexis what she needed to hear. The difference between the two had become impossible to parse. 18 months after the incident, a podcast called Context did a 3-part series about the gym assault case. The host was a journalist named Rachel Price, and she'd done actual research. She interviewed Corinne at length, letting her tell her side of the story without editorializing. She interviewed people who'd been at the gym. She interviewed the detective who'd handled the case. She interviewed Christine Patterson, who'd refused to cooperate until the very end, and then only to record a short statement about how the podcast was victimizing her daughter again. The 3rd episode was just Corinne talking, her voice describing the divorce, the invisibility, the moment of rage, and everything that followed. "I became someone I hated," Corinne said in the podcast. "Someone willing to hurt a child to feel powerful. I don't get to undo that. I don't get to reframe it. I just get to acknowledge it and try to be different going forward. That's all anyone gets, really." The podcast didn't make her sympathetic. Rachel was careful about that. Corinne was still the person who'd assaulted a teenager, but it added dimension. It suggested that the world was more complicated than the stories the internet had agreed to tell about it. The response was mixed. Some people listened to Corinne's side and softened. Some people listened and doubled down on their condemnation. Some people just wanted the story to be simple again: woman bad, girl victim, justice served. But something shifted, at least for Corinne. The telling of her story, the acknowledgement of all the parts of it, the rage and the shame and the consequences and the slow attempt to become someone different, that seemed to matter. Not redemption, exactly, but recognition, proof that she'd existed as more than the moment of her worst choice. She saw Madison one more time, about 2 years after the initial incident. It was at a coffee shop, and Madison was alone, reading a book. She'd cut her hair short, and she looked older in a way that suggested that the weight of everything had matured her prematurely. Corinne was ordering coffee when Madison noticed her. Their eyes met. Madison's expression flickered through several emotions: surprise, anger, something else that Corinne couldn't name. Madison stood up. For a moment, Corinne thought the girl was going to yell at her, create a scene, make this moment public and consequential. Instead, Madison walked over and said quietly, "I listened to that podcast." "Okay," Corinne said. "You cried," Madison said, "at the end when you were talking about regret." "I did," Corinne said. "I've been in therapy," Madison said, "for a long time. The therapist said that what happened between us became more important than what actually happened between us. The story became bigger than the incident." "I'm sorry about that," Corinne said. "I can't control how people respond to what I did, but I'm sorry it became so big." Madison nodded slowly. "I'm sorry I was disrespectful. I didn't know that at the time, but I was. I can see that now. I was an asshole and you were an adult, and neither of those things justifies what you did, but they're both true." "They are," Corinne agreed. "I don't forgive you," Madison said. "I don't think I'll ever forgive you, but I don't hate you anymore. I think we're both people who made mistakes and have to live with them." She stood there for a moment longer, as if waiting for Corinne to respond. Corinne wasn't sure what to say. This was forgiveness adjacent, or maybe it was the space where actual understanding lived. Not full reconciliation, not absolution, just the recognition that both people were human and flawed and doing the best they could with the aftermath. "Thank you for telling me that," Corinne said finally. Madison nodded and walked back to her table. She picked up her book. Corinne got her coffee. The world moved on in its particular way, with small moments of grace interspersed with the ongoing difficulties of existing. When Corinne left the coffee shop, she felt lighter than she had in years. Not healed, not redeemed. Just lighter, as if some of the weight she'd been carrying had shifted into a different shape, something more bearable. 5 years after the assault, the district attorney's office made a decision to expunge Corinne's record. It wasn't something she'd requested. Martin had mentioned that it was theoretically possible, but the chances of the DA's office approving it were minimal. Assault convictions didn't usually get expunged, especially not high-profile ones. But the podcast had created momentum. Rachel Price had won an award for the series. Academic papers had been written about how social media shaped narratives and how the truth was often far more complicated than the stories that dominated public discourse. Corinne had become a case study in rehabilitation and the difficulty of redemption in the age of permanent digital records. The expungement was granted quietly, with no media announcement. Corinne only found out when Martin called to tell her that her criminal record had been cleared. "It doesn't undo anything," Martin said. "Public records of the case still exist. People can still find them, but officially, legally, you don't have a conviction anymore." "Why did they do it?" Corinne asked. "Because you've demonstrated genuine rehabilitation," Martin said. "You've worked consistently. You're engaged in community service. You haven't been arrested again. You've shown meaningful change." Corinne hung up and cried. Not because she was forgiven. She didn't believe in forgiveness anymore, didn't think that's how the world worked. But because there was a limit to the punishment. Because the system, however imperfectly, had decided that the price had been paid. She was working at a nonprofit now, as a case manager helping women navigate legal systems and domestic crises. She was good at it because she understood the particular shame of being publicly judged, of having your worst moment become permanent record. She was also teaching, part-time at a community college, teaching financial literacy to women re-entering the workforce after difficult circumstances. Her credentials had been reinstated. Her past came up sometimes in interviews, and she was honest about it. Some employers didn't want to hire her. Some of them did, understanding that her past made her more empathetic, not less. She'd been promoted to a director position at the nonprofit when she got a message from Madison. A direct message on Instagram, of all places. "Hi," it read. "I got accepted to Northwestern, early decision. I'm going to study law. I think I want to do cases like mine, situations where the public narrative is wrong or incomplete. I wanted you to know that. I think you should know that something good came out of everything that happened." Corinne read the message 5 times. She showed it to David. She showed it to Susan. She didn't respond immediately because she wasn't sure what the appropriate response was. Eventually, she wrote, "That's incredible. You're going to be a great lawyer. I'm sorry again for what I did, and I'm glad that something good is coming from it. Thank you for letting me know." Madison's response was simple: "We're even." Corinne wasn't sure that was true. She didn't think debts worked that way, that you could trade an assault for a lawyer who was going to fight for nuance and complexity in the legal system. But she understood what Madison meant, that the cycle could end, that they could both move forward without carrying this thing forever. She framed the conversation and put it on her desk at work, not as a trophy or a redemption narrative, just as evidence that sometimes, if you were lucky, the people you hurt could become people who did good things with their pain. That maybe the story didn't have to be about the assault. Maybe the story could be about what came after, the complicated, unfinished, still being written story of two people learning to live in a world that had decided their worst moment was their defining moment. Corinne was 57 years old now. She still went to the gym, but differently. She went in the afternoons when it was full of all kinds of people, teenagers and middle-aged women and old men and everyone in between. She didn't claim the space. She just moved through it, taking up her portion of the world, trying to do no harm. The security cameras still recorded everything. The footage still existed somewhere, archived and preserved. The story was still online for anyone who wanted to find it. The internet never forgot, and Corinne had learned to live with being remembered. She'd learned that redemption wasn't a destination. It was just the long, difficult work of becoming slightly less bad than you'd been, day after day after day. It was apologizing in real terms and accepting that the apology would never be enough. It was living with your mistakes and trying to use them to understand other people's mistakes. It was loving the world despite its brutality, being kind despite having experienced cruelty, choosing to believe in possibility despite overwhelming evidence that nothing changed, not really, not fundamentally. It was just surviving and trying to make sure that in surviving, you didn't hurt anyone else on your way. The security tape existed, the evidence was permanent, the story was written. But Corinne was learning that she could write a different story with her life, one that wasn't about the assault, or the conviction, or the redemption. One that was just about showing up every day and trying to be a person worth knowing.